Alright, so in this video I want to talk about some techniques for soldering and the right way to solder and things like that. So I'm going to show you some, hopefully show you some bad ways and some not so, and some good ways as well. So it's one of those things where after you do it for a little while, it just kind of comes naturally. It's real easy. But first thing you start out with is a very clean tip. So I just clean my tip right here. That's the first thing. I make sure it's clean. And to get good heat transfer, you should have just a little bit of solder on the end, like that. So one of the things you want to do is when you heat, you don't want to heat just the hole, and you don't want to heat this, because here's an example. If I heat this right here, watch what happens when I solder down here. The solder wants to flow towards the heat. So you want to make sure that you're touching. You see how it sticks to that? It wants to stick where it's hot. So that's the wrong way to solder. You want to make sure you're not just touching this that you need to solder, but you also need to make sure you're touching this hole. So I made a mess out of my solder tip when I cleaned it up. So when you do this, you want to put your tip right where both of them are, like that. And then you want to touch right where the same spot is. And as soon as you do, you'll see the solder just flows to right around everything. So that was a good solder. So you see how it's shiny and stuff like that? If you go really quick, now I got really hot tips, so if I just would go really quick, that's not a good solder joint. You can kind of see it's missing spots because it didn't flow anywhere. So when solder gets hot, it wants to flow where things are hot. Like I mentioned up here, when I did it up here, you'll see the solder wants to flow to where the heat is. It wants to stick where the heat is. So you take advantage of that and let the solder heat everything up. Let me get rid of some of this again. So when you do something like this, you stick it where both of them are, and you just tap the solder right in between, and the solder will flow. And when it flows, it goes between both parts, just like that. Signature of a bad solder joint is whenever it's kind of like dull looking, which means it probably didn't flow. It may have just gotten like on this area right out here, like that, or something similar to that. I can't really make it happen, but you can see how it wants to flow where the heat is. So. Again, we'll do this again, and when we'll show you another. I'll do some of the LEDs here too. So let me pause it and put some LEDs in real quick. All right, now I have two LEDs in here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to again put my tip down where both the hole and the piece of metal coming through the hole is, and I'm just going to tap it just like that. Flows real nicely. What you don't want to do is you don't want to come in here and just blobber it all up like that, because then you get this big blob. Then if it happens, sometimes you come over here, and it wants to go where it's the hottest. So I come over here, and I put this big blob here, and they run together. That's not good. So that's a really bad solder joint. That's the worst you can have, actually. So now I'm going to show you something here. If you make a mess, there are a couple of different ways to get solder out. This is called solder wick. And basically, it's copper, and it gets hot really quick, and it's going to soak up the solder, and you'll see that happen. You see the solder is going, it wants to go where things are the hottest. There you go. Solder's on there, off your hole. So your hole's all cleaned up now. But you see this right here, it's not really soldered very good. You can still see the pad. You shouldn't see the pad like that. So you see my tip's all messed up. And make sure you have a clean tip. That's the most important thing. If you got a big glob of solder on your tip or something, it's not going to work real well. Again, touch where the two metals meet, just tap, just like that. Where the two metals meet, tap, just like that. Again, right here, I'm going to tap where the two metals meet, and then tap where the two metals meet, and like that, it just flows right around. Again, I'm just going to tap, just like that. I make it sound simple, and it's something it comes naturally the more you do it. Just keep practicing with it. And it's just part of the idea of this kit is to get you to practice soldering. It gets to the point where you don't even have to think about it anymore. Now, again, I do run it very hot. I run 730 some degrees. Most of them are probably going to be a little cooler than that, probably in the 300 to 400 range. So it just takes a little bit longer. You gotta be careful. If you do run as hot as my tip is, you can easily melt something on the other side. If I was to sit here and keep playing with this, I would probably melt it. I just know that I go fast enough that I don't hurt the electronic components. So, an important thing to know. And again, unsoldering, there's something called a solder sucker, where you can like heat up the solder like this, and then he sucks out the solder. Those work okay, I guess. The solder wick to me works a lot better, so I always use the solder wick. I am going to do a video on selecting the right solder and the tips and all that stuff, because that's very important. My tip is really small and really pointy compared to some of the defaults. Now, some of the ones that are out there come with smaller tips that you can exchange out. Some people like big, fatter tips. I actually do not. I do a lot of real small work. You can see, keep my tip tinned, just like that. And sometimes if you get a big glob like that, if you don't, sometimes you can do is like you see this little black thing here I'm using. I just tap it like that, and the solder is liquid enough that it came off. So you can see it's dulling up pretty quick there though. So I need to keep it cleaned and ready to go. But still, it's ready. It's pretty much ready to go. Yeah, real quick and just tap and go. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of how to solder. Again, just to go through it, put your tip on both the hole area and what's going through the hole. Just put your tip right in there and then touch the solder right in that same spot, and it'll just melt and flow right around. And what you'll notice is after the solder gets on there, it'll flow a lot faster and things heat up a lot faster. The solder helps take and distribute the heat between the parts really quickly. If you see that it's dull looking, that means it's a cold solder joint, which means you didn't get it hot enough for long enough. That's one of the things that you don't have a problem with so much if you run a very hot tip on a soldering iron. You can go through really quickly. And this board's just for demonstration, so I can kind of like just show that quickly I can fill up a hole. Just because of being that hot. If I would go like really quick, it's still hot enough that it's not leaving a mark. So. Yeah, I can't even make a dull mark because it's so hot. Anyways, that's a tip on how to get started with soldering. Take your time, just be patient with it. And if you think you're making a mess out of something, just clean up the mess first and come back and do it again. It never hurts to go back and redo it again. So, all right, that's it for soldering. Check out the video if it's out there for tips. It talks about different types of tips you can put on your soldering iron, different types of soldering irons. And it gives you some tip also about the solder I'm using. I'm using a different kind of solder as well, so it's a thinner solder. It makes it a little bit easier. I give you all those kind of tips in another video there.